he has a.
Wrong.
He's the first person that I know that's been in the ski world that really has addressed the issue and pointed out the specifics of the environmental concerns with ski areas. He's just not a gung-ho skier at all costs. And I'd like to comment on that because that's an important contribution. And his snow country is basically a sense of place. In the snow country, he said there's something like 45 counties in the United States that have statistics on skiing. And he shares some of the same concerns I do with what we're doing with the sport. I think it's called overkill.
And sense of place,
yeah,
it gives you a feeling of community.
That's exactly right.
So I guess what I'd ask you is maybe you could talk about the sense of community, that the mountain community, that, A is ideal and B is the reality today.
Yeah, we can do a little bit of that.
Well, let's come back to that. I'd like to start off with the community you grew up in.
You mean Pico Peak in Rutland, Vermont? Yes, I did grow up there. And Mother and Father put in the first T-bar in North America. They started Pico Peak, I think, back in 36 or 37. And then it was a rope tow, and they had night skiing and night slaloms. They did some very creative things with skiing in those days. And then...
Wasn't there something like the Sunset Trail?
Oh, yeah, the Sunset Trail. Well, Charlie Proctor designed the Sunset Trail. And we thought it was wonderful. It was very narrow at the time, but I don't think they had the same criteria for downhill runs, as they do now. But we used to put on our climbing skins and go paddle up to the top of the mountain. It was pretty entertaining. But then somewhere in the late 30s, in fact, the year of the Anschluss, which was I think 39, they went off to Europe. And to see what kind of ski equipment or what kind of ski facility would be out there that would be more efficient and carry more people than a rope tow, which is what they had. And they got to Davos, Switzerland, where they found T-bars, and they found Ernst Konstam, and they brought Ernst Konstam. He was the inventor of the T-bar, and they brought him over to the United States. And Roeblings out of Boston built the T-bar at Pico. And that was the first one in North America. So they were ahead of their times in a lot of ways, way ahead of it. But that's where I grew up. And then, my father passed away. Well, he was killed in a motorboat accident in 1942. And that winter, my mother was asked to to captain a team that was going over to Lake Placid. And during the war years, there were only two international races. One was in Lake Placid with the Canadians, and the other was in Canada with the Americans. So that was, and I was a kid, I was 10 years old. And they said, well, wouldn't Andrew like to go over and be the mascot or whatever, tadpole I call it, but they were calling it the mascot. So over I went, and then somebody along that line said, would you like to run the slalom? I said, yeah, I'd love to. So I went up. And, they didn't groom the slopes at that point in time. So I went up the mountain and climbed up and looked at the course and came down. And I remember it vividly because it's an intuitive, psychic click, as I call it. I went through a gate. It was a hairpin, and I knew exactly where it was. And exactly the moment where I felt, that's perfect. I felt just perfect in that one little spot. And here I am, umpteen millions of years later. But it was fun, but anyway, so then I became a part of the team after a while.
Was that at the Lake Placid Club?
Yes. It was at the Lake Placid Club, and the Kate Smith Trophy Race, it was called. And we would go over there every winter. And then we would go to Mont Tremblant or
Saint-Sever.
Yeah, Saint-Sever, and all of those. And that would be the reciprocal event for the year.
Now, who else was racing then from the Canadian? Were the Waddle sisters?
The Wordle Twisters absolutely were there. They were the icons of all the women's ski racing. They were a powerhouse, the two of them, and they were fun. They were delightful people. So we would race against them, and I never got. The only time I could ever beat them was 1950 at the Harriman Cup race, and of course they were probably past their prime then too. But anyway, it was wonderful. And there was a great crew. I think Lucille Wheeler was there at some point in time. I'd have to go back and look at the old roster, but I mean, there were just some great racers and all that.
And Sally, the two girls, two sisters from.
Oh, Sally and Sue Neidlinger?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were there on our team, of course. Paula Convillar was there.
And was she an amateur still at that? Yeah. I guess
Oh, she was absolutely an amateur. She had only recently come over from Austria with her father. Who else was there? Well, there were several of them, and they were just terrific.
Nancy Reynolds Cook.
No, Nancy Reynolds Cook was she would have made the 40 team. Nosedive Annie, we used to call her. We didn't do it. I mean, she was known as Nosedive Annie. And that was entertaining because the people in Stowe, where she was living at the time, knew that they would look out and they'd see Ann going up to climb up Nosedive. And they say, well, must be 10 minutes of 9. There goes Nosedive Annie. Set your clock by her.
What did you race in Stowe when you had to climb up, or by the time did you?
No. By the time I got there, there were lifts in there. We never had to climb it. Lake Placid was a different story. We did have to climb.
Now, what about Woodstock? Did you get over to Woodstock to ski?
Well, interestingly enough, I raced the Suicide 6 run one day, just before coming out west. And actually, I won a 6, but I never got it because I didn't stay around long enough. I left, and we had to come out west. Yeah, no, that was a pretty interesting hill.
So what was the first trip you remember coming out west? What?
Oh, 1947. Clearly, it was 1947.
And that was
That was for the Olympic tryouts. But before we got to the Olympic tryouts, we had to go to we had to qualify for the Eastern Amateur Ski Eastern Amateur Ski Association. That was the segment of it that covered New England. So we had to qualify on that level before we were able to know whether we could go out west. And as it turns out, I did qualify, and I did come west.
You were how old?
14. And I made the team at 14. Qualified for the team.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, was it at Sun Valley and meeting, you can throw Virginia in there, I mean.
Yeah, well, it was in Sun Valley. Well, first of all, it started off outside of Salt Lake City, Snow Bowl outside of Salt Lake City.
Snow Basin.
Snow Basin, thank you. And I remember seeing, it was the first time we'd seen the Swiss team, and boy, was I impressed. I hope I have that right. It may have been in Whitefish, Montana in 1949. But anyway, the first time I saw them, boy, you talk about a drill. They were all in alignment, and the coach was up front, and everybody else was plodding behind them, just in step, and in step. Just a nice little straight line going up the hill. That was I was very impressed with that. But anyway, we went out, and we went out by the train, and Mother put me in charge of the Neidlingers, the twins, plus their father, who was the dean of Dartmouth, and their mother. And at some point, somebody brought me a check for my meal. So I said, as only a fresh 14-year-old kid could say, hand it to that man in the red tie. Well, the man in the red tie was Dean Neidlinger of Dartmouth. Slightly irreverent, but anyway. So we came out. We spent, I can't remember how long. I stayed out west quite a long time. And we had the Olympic tryouts. And I won the Olympic tryout slalom. And that surely put me on the team. And then there was the downhill. We didn't have giant slalom then. It was too soon for the giant slaloms. And then there was the Harriman Cup. And the Nationals. I don't remember how I did in the Nationals. I don't have a great memory for what I did.
But do you remember a reaction or how you felt when you saw Sun Valley? Did it impress
Well,
you?
yeah, I was impressed with it. It was just that at that point in time, it was to me anyway, it was an ideal ski area. It wasn't overly impacted with buildings, no condominiums. You had the wonderful Sun Valley Lodge, and you had the Challenger, which is where, and then in the back of the Challenger, you had little cottages with dorms, and we were in those, of course. And and the sports shop, and then the Challenger, the cafeteria at the Challenger, and then if we were lucky, we got invited to the Sun Valley Lodge for a meal or something like that. But anyway, we skied and loved it. We went down to saw the dog teams. I mean, we just did fun things.
All mass transit.
All mass transit, all buses. And when we went off to ski, we got on a bus to go skiing. There was no way we needed to have a car. It was wonderful. It was very well laid out, and I don't think you could afford to do that today. Put that kind of a ski area in, but it'd be ideal if you could. Just ideal. I mean, it limits the number of people you can have skiing there, but that wasn't Averil Harriman's concern.
You know, what about it must have been the first chairlift you saw as well.
Is that right? Well, I'd seen one probably in Ogden at Snow Basin.
If they had one that early.
I think they did.
47, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And you'd seen stuff, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you were growing up, did you have any exposure to, like, Swiss skiers? Wasn't there a Carl?
Well, Karl Acker, mother and father, when they came back from Switzerland in 1939, and whatever year, I think it was 39, they brought back Karl Acker as the head of their ski school. And as little kids, of course, we tagged along behind him, we watched him, we observed him. But I don't ever remember having formal training by him or with him. But I have no doubt that somewhere in the course of the slaloms we set up that he was there and he was giving directions. He was a wonderful man. Did a great job for Pico and ultimately bought Pico. And then he died too. But anyway, he was just a fine man. And of course, as kids, we just had a wonderful time just careening all over the slopes at Pico. I mean, we were all over the place up there. And then as often it comes up in the family discussion, on sunny days, I had a very open-minded mother. But on sunny days, it was easier to walk across the street through the parking lot and go skiing than it was to go 9 miles on the bus to school. We did quite a bit of that.
So did you ski with your brother mostly? Who did you ski with in those days?
Well, I skied with my brother, Peter, and various friends. I can't remember all their names now, but there was just a sort of an informal group of us, and we all went out and skied together.
Just a rat pack and lots
A rat
of
pack, and off we went.
So now, here you are, you're in Sun Valley, you're 14 years old racing, you win the slalom. No summer training. What did you do? Come back to Vermont then and just...
Well, we came back to Vermont later on in the year, but the funny thing about winning the slalom, and it's fairly consistent with my normal habit patterns, one of the Nidlingers said, "Don't you think you want to call your mother and tell her you just won the Olympic slalom?" I said, "Oh, I guess I should, shouldn't I?" That's a little blasé about it, but I hadn't really paid any attention, and I don't usually. Once I've done something, I do it, and I move on to whatever the next thing is. But Mother came out west. She drove out west, and then Pat Rogers, who was the manager of the hotel there, the Sun Valley Lodge, and Pat Rogers comped my mother, and just Janet would come out and stay with us and so forth. And so I think I moved over to the lodge at that point in time. And then shortly thereafter, we climbed up to Goat Mountain. And there's a little cabin at the top of Goat Mountain. So it was my mother, and it was George Silk, who was a life photographer who was there, myself, and, this wonderful young man, Jimmy Griffith, who unfortunately died a few years later. I think it was just us, and the guide, Victor Glotchot, I think, who was the guide, and Friedel Pfeiffer and Fred Island. So it was an amazing grouping of people. It was absolutely wonderful. So we trudged on up, and George Silk took some photographs of us there, particularly Jimmy Griffith and myself. And then we got up to the hut up there, and there were 2 rooms, main rooms, where they had wide bunks on board bunks you could throw your sleeping bags on and so forth. So I threw mine up where my mother was sleeping, where we both were sleeping. And, of course, being good kids, we went to bed early, reasonably early. And it was sort of getting raucous in the kitchen area. And all these wild tales were going on. And finally they all came over and went curled up in their beds. And you know my mother, Rick, and in the middle of the night, I think it was Victor, the guide, who said, talking in his sleep, he said, "Oh, shut up, Janet, you're just like an old tea kettle." We just cracked up with that one. I thought it was wonderful. And the following morning, we started down the mountain, and I was tagging right behind Friedel and Fred. I mean, I was right on their tails. It was the ideal spring corn, when you got about that much corn. Oh, had a wonderful trip down with Friedel. I'm just going right on down. Just beautiful skiing.
Now, did he have anything to do with coaching the 48 team?
Who?
Friedel.
Oh, Friedel, no, he didn't coach the 48 team at all. He did coach the 50 FIS team. And I think Friedel's gone too, like so many have, but I learned more from Friedel Pfeiffer than I did from any other human being. And I was smart enough at a young age to know that I didn't want to have anything else come into my consciousness. I wanted to have it this, that. He had nothing but common sense. Everything he said made such common sense to me. And there are wonderful stories about, for instance, if you're training a downhill, don't stop in the same place twice. Because psychologically what's going to happen to you is that when you're racing it, you may get to that spot and think, and just pull back. Very subconsciously. You don't even know you're doing it. And funny little things he would say, don't change your socks before a race. Just stick with the same old stuff. The grungy underwear, the grungy socks, anything. Just don't change it, because subliminally you'll be aware of that. And we all had lace ski boots by then. And he said, always carry an extra shoelace with you. Could you imagine psychologically if you get into the start and you're tightening up your boots and snap, it breaks? Now what are you going to do? So he thought of all those things, and his discussion about how you take a line and what kind of a line, and were wonderful. I just thought the world of him. He was a wonderful man. Talented man.
Talented man. I'm not sure what year he won the case. Well, we were talking about Friedel, but 1948 Olympics. What did the team do? Just jump on a boat? I mean, you couldn't take a plane over.
No, we surely could not take a plane over. Well, we went down to New York, and first of all, I have to tell you about Alice Damrosch Chair. She was a remarkable woman, and her father was Walter Damrosch of the New York Symphony. And Alice was tall, very imposing, had a pension in San Anton, and as House Angelica. And she and my mother were in correspondence about uniforms, what to bring, what to wear, and all that kind of stuff. So we went down to New York, joined all the team members down there, and then we went off to see the mayor. Who was the mayor of New York in 1948? Was it?
LaGuardia?
It may have been the mayor LaGuardia. You're probably right. That's who it was. So we went up to see him, and then we had a bus, an escorted bus down to the docks where we were about to board the boat, and it was, the sirens were going, and there was a big hoopla about all of that. And then we got on the boat, and we took off for Europe, and it was about a week it took us to get over there, and we had comfortable accommodations. We weren't first class, but we weren't the bottom of the boat either. And I don't remember too much about the trip over, but I mean, it was pretty interesting. But then we got to France, and that was very interesting because the boys on the men's team, they figured out that if they had some nylons with them, this was in 1948, the war was just very shortly over, not a long time over. So, and some of them were pretty wild guys, and so they were going off to the cabarets and all of that, and meeting girls and giving them stockings, which of course bought great, whatever. I mean, that was a very smart thing to do, and but I thought that, and cigarettes, all those things that were scarce items. But France, it was not a very clean country at that point in time. So we got on the train to go to Switzerland, which is where we were going to go first, to Davos. And I remember when we went through the border, they came out with their hoses and washed down the train, just washed it all down. because it was amazing. I mean, it was just really. But for a youngster, I was 15 by then. I turned 15. I mean, it was a wonderful way to spend those teen years in Europe. I mean, it was so full of history. There was so much history going on there. We went around. We went to Davos, and then at Davos, Alice Chair decided that the girls should have their own coach, because the system was that they were going to have a member of the boys' team come around and coach us on a daily basis. Well, she wasn't going to have anything to do with that. That was not going to work for Alice, nor for us, actually. So she acquired a Swiss coach, Walter Hensley. And so we had our own coach. And we did a lot of training, and we did all of that. And I think we went off to Grindelwald. Yeah, we did go to Grindelwald, as a matter of fact, for the first international. The opening of the international race season in Europe for the women starts in Grindelwald, and at the same time, the men on the other side of the hill over in Wengen. So I was having a great time. I just thought it was wonderful. So I was screaming down not screaming down the course, but I was coming down at a pretty good clip. And in those days, if you wanted to get more oomph through the finish line and grab another half a quarter of a whatever instant of a second, you would kind of pump, through the finish line. Well, I was so exuberant, I was jumping through. I was just going, coming off the ground 2 or 3, and so many inches off the ground or whatever it is. And Alice had a friend, Hannes Schroll. I think that's his name. But there's another Hannes Schroll out here.
Is Hannes? It's with a T.
Yeah, TSCHOLL.
Right.
That's it, Hannes Schroll. And he turned to Alice and said she'd be much quicker if she kept her feet on the ground. That was kind of entertaining. So
he was kind of her private coach.
Yes, he was sort of the private coach, and her traveling companion. I mean, he just. She was married to a very attractive Norwegian, actually, Chair, Kiaer. And
did she still have her St. Bernard Friedel at that point?
I don't know whether Friedel. He didn't have a Friedel. No, Friedel had a St. Bernard?
No. Alice Chair had one.
Oh, did she?
In the 30s. And
I don't think she still had it by 48. I don't think she. I don't ever remember seeing her.
Big dogs don't last much.
No, they don't. They don't last much longer than that. And then we went back to Davos and did some more training and so forth. And then finally we had to pick up and go off to St. Moritz. And we were very nicely housed, I must say. I mean, we weren't in any sort of poverty setting. It was just very comfortable, not blatant, but I mean, it was tastefully done. And
traveling by
train, just always by train. So we were in St. Moritz, and then they had was it in Pontresina? Out of St. Moritz or out of Davos? I can't remember which one, Rick. But anyway, there was a race before the Olympics started, and I went up to it, and by damn, I won the bloody thing. I couldn't believe it. I mean, here I am, a smart-faced 15-year-old kid. I nowhere near was that followed through with a 48 Olympic team, but I had also a great aunt and uncle that I absolutely loved and spent the summers with, the Bradfords out of Connecticut. And they came over and they brought my brother over, which I thought was very nice. So the downhill was just absolutely free-form all the way. I mean, you start at the top, there was no trees, there was nothing around you, but this wide open slope. And there was one place down where you dropped down, and then you had to turn and make a right turn and go on up over the hill. It was a gully. I was going like a fool. I was going so fast, just wildly out of control. Not out of control, but I had not enough experience to know really where to throw the check in. Of course, I cartwheeled all the way down that gully, hauled myself back up, and got up down there and got down to the finish line. And I thought years afterward that probably 15 is a little too young to have won a gold medal, if that's what I would have done. But anyway, it was a learning experience, you could call it that.
If you'd stood it up.
If I'd stood up, yeah. And then in the slalom, of course, Gretchen Fraser, as we know, won the slalom. The first American gold was Gretchen's gold. And I think I was 8th or 9th. I have to go back and check records because the truth is I really don't remember them.
We can always check.
You can check them.
They're a matter of public record.
Definitely a matter of public, so you can go check them. And I can't remember what I was in the combined, but I think I was in the first 10. I'm not sure about that. And then from there, that was the Olympics.
You remember Barney McLean or Gordy Wren?
Oh yes, I remember all those guys. They were wonderful. And then the other ones that I remember were Boots and Bob Blatt. Wonderful. Boots Blatt, who I thought was such an attractive guy, and he invited me for the Christmas party. So I went off and had the Christmas party with Boots Blatt, which I thought was great fun. And the other thing we did in Davos is that we did tea dancing. It's a very civilized way to have a sport, is to have that sort of thing going on. They'd come home from skiing. We wouldn't necessarily take off our ski clothes, but we'd take off our ski boots, obviously, and we'd go tea dancing. And at the Fluella Hotel where we stayed, it was all tea dancing. It was wonderful. And then I had a nice young man who came to go tea dancing with me almost every day we did it. Yancey Brunger was his name. And there's a funny connection to him and David Lawrence later on, because they all knew each other in Davos, but I'll go back to that story later. So we just had a wonderful time. And then Alice decided that one day she decided that we should go to church. So we put on our teddy bear coats, big teddy bear coats with the emblem here, the Olympic emblem here. And she marched us down to the church. We went into the church, and there was no place for this whole long line of teddy bear coats. So we went down to the front of the pew, sat down, and the church was in service. So we sat down, and the next thing you know, it was over. I mean, we were late, you might say. I thought, oh dear, that's pretty embarrassing. But anyway, we didn't go back. Anyway, Alice had, that sort of propensity for doing things that way. Then we went to.
And she was reaching in her pocket a lot to support.
I bet that's true. That wouldn't surprise me a bit. And I hadn't thought about that until you mentioned it. But also, I was blissfully unaware at 15. I just wasn't even close to being aware of what was going on, or who was paying for it. But Cordy Hill, wonderful Cordy Hill, was the manager of the team. And so when we got his nickname at the end of that winter was Caboose, because he had to bring tons of luggage that we all had and our ski equipment, put it all in and see that it all got to where it was supposed to get to. And Cordy and his wife and I think his stepchildren were there. And we, so he got us all to where we were supposed to be going. And then after that, we went to St. Anton, Austria, and we went by bus actually, and it was an open, the buses that had the old buses that were the top roll back, canvas tops that just roll back. But if you're driving from St. Moritz to St. Anton, there's some very steep pitches down into the river, and we would look down, and then Herman Joel and Alice, of course, wanted it pulled back all the way back. And you're looking up at this precipice that's up above you, and rocks can come right straight down on top of you. And Herman said something about that, and then Alice just, dismissed it without taking any, it's not important. So this was a very funny movie made. He just sat there, and he just quietly reached up to the top, over his head to the rack where you stored your stuff, picked up his hat and put it on his head. Now that would have done nothing in case a rock had come down. But it was very dry humor. I mean, it was just a very funny thing to do. He was entertaining. Anyway, we went on to St. Anton. And, I was struck with the poverty in St. Anton and that was, I think, occupied by the French at that time. But, they still brought out their Oompa Oompa band, and they all met us when we drove in. And it was just a very nice thing. And a lot of us stayed at Alice's pension. And there was a race there. I don't know.
So she still had her house there after the war.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think she was somewhat instrumental in getting Hannes Schneider out of Austria when the Germans came in. So anyway, we stayed there, and then in '51 we stayed there again. Was it '51 or '52? We stayed there more than once.
Yeah. Did you guys ever go up to the Post Hotel for tea or anything?
Oh yes, we went to the Post Hotel. I think at some point in time we even stayed at the Post Hotel. Sometimes this stuff runs together in my head. But the Post Hotel, of course, was absolutely wonderful.
Now, did you get to race in the Kandahar?
Oh, that year I did, yes. And I was second or third in the slalom. So I have a Kandahar pin and a little cup. I know. It was just fun. We so anyway, that was Saint Anton, and it's a lovely town. I just love it. Beautiful place, friendly people. But we were eating at the Post Hotel, and I felt a little self-conscious about that because I don't know that many of those Austrians that lived in that community had had many square meals since before the war. So that was a little difficult to do. And then at some point we went on to Kitzbühel. Was it Kitzbühel? It wasn't Kitzbühel. It was Salzburg. And that was the American zone. And then in the American zone, the castle that's up on the hill there, that was being lived in by the commanding officer of our forces. And then we took a private train, mind you. This is great elegance for a kid. Took a private train up to Bad Gastein because they were there having their Austrian national championships. And we were invited to race in it, which we did. And there were two things that impressed me there. Well, one thing didn't necessarily impress me, but one of the things that did impress me is that it was still so soon after the war. But the Austrian men were on the other side of the hill from where we were. And I went over to watch them. And many of them were amputees. And they had their own event. But they had these, things that go on your arms. And they, in turn, were doing the same thing as they headed through the finish line. They would pump up and down on with those arm things on. And I was very impressed with that. That sort of stuff really, really stayed in my head. And then, of course, I won the event. And that was amazing. But we didn't stay long enough for me to get to get the trophy. And I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that. But that comes back around in 1951. I'll now move ahead in time with you for a little bit, because this was in 48. So in 1951, 4 Americans were invited to go to Europe when we were hosted by the Alpine countries. When we were in Switzerland, the Swiss took care of us. When we were in Austria, the Austrians, and Italian, the Italian, and French, the French. So we were, and at that point, I was engaged to be married to David Lawrence. And when we got to Bad Gastein again, David's mother was raised in Vienna, so she knew clearly the language extremely well. David knew it. And I won again. And then when I was going in to get for the award ceremony, I'm sitting there and I'm listening to this long comment by this fellow up on the stage. And Ping sort of smiled, and David sort of smiled, and I looked at them thinking, ooh, what is this all about? Well, it turns out he was talking about this young girl who had been there in 1948 and had won this thing but didn't pick up her trophy. And here she's back again, and she's won again, and here's the thing to do with the 2 trophies. Well, it was very nice. It was a nice thing to do. They have that sort of grace and charm. But that's what connects 48 to 51. But when we were there in 48, Mother kept putting me in charge of older women. Now, if I was 15, that means they were 25. And that means they probably need more chaperoning than I needed at that point in all our lives. But one of them was Dodie Post. Now Dodie Post Gann, who lives at Friday Harbor. She married Ernie Gann, the pilot and the writer and the sailor and all these wonderful things. So Dodie and I went down in the village, and we had a room in a hotel, which is right into where the waterfall comes down into Bad Gastein. And it was the Fern. The Fern was in residence at that time. It had blown off the Sahara Desert. And I just loved it. You could just feel some tremendous relaxation. I mean, air was balmy, and the waterfall was falling. And we opened the balcony up so we could just hear this water coming through. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time. And I've always loved Bad Gastein. It's just a very special place for me. So
that is in Switzerland.
No, it's Austria.
Austria.
Yeah.
Is it right there on the north of Salzburg then, near Kitzbühel, or?
No, it's not near Kitzbühel, but it's. I don't think it is. I'd have to have a map in front of me, but it didn't take too long by train to get up there from Salzburg. But while we were there, we also went into where Hitler had his eyrie. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah,
But-
I know what you mean.
Yeah, but I mean, that was another a memorable experience for me, because it's his living room was all the front window was all glass. The front area was all one great big huge glass. And then walking down the stairs to get to it, you know, there was glass all over the place. I mean, it was not, I think it's now, I don't know what it is now, but it's certainly cleaned up, that's for sure. But I remember being very struck with that, because you think of him as being a madman, and he may have been.
But he had an elegant
He
mountain home.
had an elegant mountain home. It was more than an elegant mountain home, but I mean, he had this sort of Wagnerian vision about the world and his place in it, and the people's place in it, and it was very impressive. Anyway, those are some of the incidents that we did, and then at some point we went to we went to Chamonix, where they had the Alberg Kandahar. And the men were skiing off Mont Blanc. The women were racing down the Brévent. And the Brévent had an aerial tramway that came up the second half of it and slammed right into the rock on the mountain, carved out this thing. And you crawl out, and then you see these signs, Danger de Mort. And you know, that's a little interesting. Anyway, slalom seems to have been the thing that I was always able to do. So I did well in the slalom again. I can't remember what it was, but I did something well with the slalom. It was another gold. It was another medal, another AK medal.
He's telling me we got 5 minutes. We'll use another tape. So this was in '51, before the Olympics.
No, this was in '48. I moved back in time
Yeah,
with you to
okay.
'48. And then,
So the AK race was in Chamonix
yes, in '48.
in '48. And then when you went back in '51, you won again in
Bodgestein, yeah.
Bragastan.
And the AK in '51 was in Sestriere. They moved it around, you know. It was established in such a way that it went from Austria to Switzerland, and then France got into it, and then Italy got into it. So those are the 4 places. I don't know how many they have now, but yeah.
Well, now, did you have to go to an Olympic? I mean, if you're in Europe in '51, you didn't have to
No.
go to any tryouts.
No. But I have to tell you, this is such an immodest story to be talking about all of this way. I'm not like talking about somebody else instead of about me. But by my personal standards, '51 was the most important year of my racing career, because I won almost every race I went into. And it was, I mean, I can't remember. I did the tally for it when I co-authored this book. But I think I won 12 out of 15 races, and I was second in 2, and I disqueued in 1, which happens to have been the AK slalom. But otherwise, it was just a stunning year. Because I set a personal standard, and it's important to understand that personal standard. I didn't have any coaching that year. I was just doing what I was doing, and my personal objective was to extend myself to my maximum every time I left a starting gate. I didn't play the game of being cozy about, well, I won the downhill by so many seconds or whatever it was, so I don't have to work as hard in the slalom. That wasn't what I was doing. I didn't care what I did in the previous races. I was just going to go and I maxed out every time I left the starting gate. And people would ask me, well, how did you do that? And I was trying to think how to explain that. Because what I was really doing was nobody couldn't refer to a book and read about it. I would explain it that it was like myself, my energy level, it was like being in a pressure cooker. And I put the lid on it after the race was on and let that pressure build up. And then when we got to the following weekend, you get on the train, you travel to your area, you get into the courses, you do all of the things you normally do. And then it's Saturday morning when you're into the race, you take the top off the pressure cooker. And that's the only way I could explain it. I didn't know any other way. I mean, you talk about flow or altered states or whatever it is they talk about now. And I understand that now.
We're gonna stop and put in another tape. Got
Yeah,
a minute left.
Yeah. You need about a minute from us, anybody else to pick up, to be comfortable with.
Yeah. So, we're gonna, pick this up, and, it's pretty remarkable, I guess, that Alice Chair was just such an amazing force in women's.
Oh, tremendous
supporting
force.
women.
Remarkable.
This was tape number 9, right?
Right.
Correct.
She
Absolutely
did-
tremendous.
And, I wouldn't be surprised if Courtney Hill helped financially, too. if he
I
was
wouldn't be
the
surprised
manager.
either. He was, I'm sure, I mean, he would do a lot of things and nobody would ever know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a lovely man. I named my first son after him. I have a son, Cortland. And he's just a lovely man.
Well, Christina Hill said she was very lucky with all her husbands.
That's a nice way to put it. Yeah, no, that's
They're
great.
all good men.
That's what she said, yeah.
All good men.